All right. I'm so excited. I'm back with Molly. We are doing a part 2 of the Embracing Autism series. It looks like it's going to be a series now because the last one was so good. And for those who did not listen and for some reason are ending up watching the second one and starting from the sequel, go ahead and introduce yourself, Molly.
Yeah, hey, I'm Molly. I am an associate marriage and family therapist. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I specialize in LGBT issues and neurodivergence, so autism, ADHD, other types of neurotypes that don't totally fit into the standard social scripts.
And as you guys know, I'm Aaron Q, LMFT, Master and Commander of the LifeMaxx Podcast. So yeah, let's jump into it. Let's go over a couple quick little points, right? Just to kind of review where we left off last time. So we talked about embracing autism, and in a nutshell, did you want to kind of hit on some keynotes there?
Yeah, well, I think the main things that we kind of talked about were partially the constellation of behaviors, traits, and experiences that people on the spectrum can experience and that can help them identify if they're on this spectrum or if they're interested in seeing about more formal diagnosis. So those can be things like having intense special interests or passions. They can be things like having hyposensitivity or hypersensitivity, and a whole slew of traits and also values that are kind of typical for those who aren't typical. So like loyalty, speaking truth to power, honesty, and really caring about justice and fairness, things like that.
And on that note, right, on neurotypicality, I said it right this time, on neurotypicality and how this informs why autism is classified as a disorder. Did you want to expand on that piece too?
Yeah. Last time we spoke, I really glossed over what neurotypicality is, other than I think I said like it basically means conforming to society. And I wanted to get a little bit more in depth with that because neurotypical is the standard by which deviations are defined as disorders. So neurotypical basically just means you are okay with the standard social scripts, like in terms of your neurological structuring, your social structuring. It's like society as it is more or less makes sense to you and more or less feels like, oh yeah, like I can move through this world without feeling heightened levels of distress or like I can't fit in. So that's the basic idea of what neurotypical is. And then when we think about disorders and break that word apart, the emphasis is on order, right? And so, okay, if you are able to conform to society, for example, your relationships meet that kind of relationship escalator where you're dating and then you're in a relationship exclusively and then you're moving in together, you're getting married. That kind of standard script makes sense. And yeah, so it's basically like, hey, you're going to maintain the status quo of the power structures that are in our society. And so disorders are identified anytime that someone doesn't conform to society in the ways that are beneficial in terms of productivity, in terms of maintaining relational expectations, etc. And so when we're talking about disorders, if the society at large was healthy, then disorders would actually be indications of people who maybe are experiencing distress, who can be brought back in through healing, through therapy, through social support, into more of the fold. But in an unhealthy society, which I would argue we're living in, when you classify someone as disordered because they're not fitting into society, you're really oversimplifying what needs to happen, because disorders imply that we need to get them back to the ordered norm.
Yeah, that's a interesting point, because it gets a little philosophical for myself when I think of something like that. Because when you look at, like, you're using the example of fitting in society and not fitting in society, right? And let's say, for instance, antisocial, they break the rules, they go to prison. But is that not fitting in because, like, there's prisoners in society, right? And there's prisons, and prisons exist as kind of a social, a structural order in a way. So I'd be curious as to what your take is on that. And in that regard, right, if we're talking about just disorders in general, what makes a disorder a neurotypical disorder versus a personality disorder, or any of these other, like, overlapping disorders, like an anxiety or depressive disorder that we see pretty often?
Yeah, well, so let's go with your example of, like, people who are in the prison system.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to learn more and more about what complex post-traumatic stress means in terms of neurotype. Is it like, because you can experience trauma, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, people who are in the prison systems, the prison systems are a money-making endeavor. And there are mechanisms in our society in which we intentionally keep people in prisons and don't really do the type of rehabilitation. So when it comes to that kind of thing, it's like, well, these are probably people with complex trauma histories, who haven't had access to resources. Like, yeah, we're going to have some people who are maybe more on the end of like psychopathy or sociopathy or narcissism. Yeah. But that type of personality disorder, like, it's kind of a different conceptualization of, like, not fitting into society. And so to me, it gets really complex. I think you can argue that some people maybe are born with less neurotypical traits, and then there are people who experience traumas that then shape their brain. And we're going to learn more and more about that. And then in terms of, like, how we decide, is this a personality disorder? Is this like a neurotypical person with mental health issues or a neurodivergent person with mental health issues? That is really just us as clinicians trying to put things into buckets so that we can work with them.
Yeah. To make it make sense, right? And so, like, how are we going to conceptualize the direction this treatment's going to go in?
Right, exactly. And what we're going to find is there's no person has just one thing or fits into just one thing. I was in grad school reading the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that all therapists have to be familiar with. Each time I read about a new disorder, there were symptoms or traits of those disorders that I would identify with. And then I would start to wonder, could I have this thing? And really what it is the DSM is a book of human behavior. And we all are so complex and embody so many human experiences that when we're told the definition for something, it's very easy to then look for evidence to support that might be us. Especially
yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. Especially, if you go to, like, WebMD, right? Nowadays it's chat, right? Chat took its place. But we find these things, right? And we look for them. We tend to look for them, and they start to reinforce our ideas about what we think we have. And so we kind of convince ourselves into having this or that disorder.
Right, exactly. And when we do that, we run the risk of over-identifying ourselves with different disorders. Or when we get diagnoses from professionals, we may over-identify with those disorders. And really, it's like you are much more complex than any list of symptoms or behaviors or traits.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Everyone has traits of something, right? I think so anyway.
Yeah, I think so too. And you know, it's just something where it's like, hey, if the diagnosis helps you get the support you need or gives you the information that you need to be able to move through the world with greater ease, with less distress, then that's awesome and it's useful. If the disorder increases distress, then that's when therapy can come into play, where it's like, okay, maybe it's being overly identified with, it's becoming something that you feel like you can't overcome because it is you. And instead it's like, no, this is a facet of you. How can we work with what is causing distress, and how can we accept the parts of it that maybe other people have told you aren't okay, but that actually are not distressing for you as you do the work of getting to know yourself better.
And on that topic of distress, right, I wanted to steer it back before we get too far off the rails. The topic at hand, right? So autism in relationships, right? Because, you know, oftentimes, especially as MFTs, right, when we see distress and the impairments that we're working with the client to not be impaired with, right, oftentimes, actually often like 9 to 10 out of 10 times, right, it's interpersonal relationships, right? So in that realm of relationships, I wanted to know a little bit more about how this plays out in kind of like romantic relationships in a way, and how, you know, dating for someone on the spectrum can look different.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting and really rich topic. You know, I kind of alluded to the neurotypical relationship escalator earlier. That escalator also involves some kind of social norms that for neurotypicals make a lot of sense, like unspoken social cues are really common in neurotypical dating and relationships. And in some ways, like, because there's a social understanding, it doesn't feel like we're supposed to mind read. But for a neurodivergent person, an autistic person, that might feel like the other person's expecting you to read their mind, because the communication isn't very direct, and that can be really confusing. And so yeah, part of it is unspoken social scripts. Other parts of it are just about how like politeness, like niceties, small talk. That's all really welcome in neurotypical relationships. That can be a way of maintaining comfort, safety, like getting to know people without like digging in. And sometimes it means masking or not saying the thing that you're thinking, right? And with people on the autism spectrum, like being really direct is very helpful. And also, it's just what makes sense to them. It's like, I don't understand these unspoken social rules. If you just tell me you want to be done talking, that might sound really rude to a neurotypical person, but to an autistic person, that can actually be deeply regulating and deeply comforting, because they're not wondering if they're doing the right thing in the social dynamic. So, you know, so it is interesting kind of looking at this relational escalator and saying, okay, this is really comfortable for neurotypical people. What do relationships look like for more neurodivergent people? And it can be like connecting over passions or special interests. Empathy and connection can look different. So, you know, on a neurotypical date, you might say, oh, so what's something you've been looking forward to? Or what's something that you've done recently that's cool? Oh, well, recently I went on a trip. Oh, tell me more about that. You know, like, oh, okay, well, you know, we went to this place in the mountains. We got to visit with these baby goats. It was super cute. Oh my gosh, tell me, like, what were the goats like? What led you to do that while you were on vacation? And so it's one person talking and the other person probing or asking questions, follow-up questions. And that's a way of building rapport. In neurodivergent relationships, it might be one person like basically talking at length about something they're passionate about, a collection that they have, or a video games or music that they're really interested in. And then when they're done talking, the other person says, oh my God, that reminds me of this video game that I really like. And then they might go on a totally different thing. They might not actually respond that much. They might not even say, that reminds me. They might just start talking about whatever they're passionate about. And for neurotypicals, that might be like, oh, God, he didn't even ask me a question. He just started talking about himself. And in neurodivergence, that's actually a deep form of connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then this is a piece that I'm particularly interested in knowing about. So in that regard of romantic relationships, right? Is it different for, I guess, neurodivergent females, neurodivergent males, and let's say opposite, obviously opposite sex partners? And because I don't know, maybe it's just me and where I'm at, or we hear more about it for the guys, and the guys having these types of challenges in relationships. You don't hear about it much with female neurodivergent, or I don't anyway. I mean, I don't know about what your experience is with that, or if you could maybe tell me more, if maybe you've heard about as to, or maybe even why, if that is the case where we hear about it more with the guys, why don't we hear about it as much with the females?
Yeah, and this is something that I think relates to what we talked about last week somewhat, in terms of why women and assigned female at birth people are more likely to be diagnosed later in life, right?
Yeah.
The social expectations that women fit in are more intense. Women are scrutinized differently. They're expected to be polite. They're expected. And so, so you see a different type of masking and an earlier expectation of social conformance in females. And so that's part of it, is that they've learned these scripts, and masking is really practiced. That's part of it. The other part of it is people with autism who are female are more likely to have socially acceptable special interests. And so they're going to be more versed in relationships. They're more likely to have done research and observed in hyper detail how other people are reacting and behaving, and they might find that really interesting, and mimicking or taking on those types of behavioral interactions or behaviors can be a part of the special interest. That's certainly been my experience. Like as a therapist with autism, it's like I've studied human behavior since I was so young. And so when I'm doing it, sometimes it's a form, it's almost a form of play. It's a form of research. It's a form of engagement that actually keeps me close to a passion that really matters to me.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. No, that's a good breakdown. It makes sense.
Yeah, and going in a slightly different direction in terms of the gendered piece, you'll also find that neurodivergent people are significantly more likely to identify as one or more types of queer identities. So you might see more bisexuality, gayness, asexuality, or aromanticism, where it's they just don't experience romantic attraction, even if they experience sexual attraction, or like certain interpersonal attractions, emotional attraction, intellectual, spiritual, etc. But there just isn't this drive internally towards romantic relationships specifically, or sexual relationships specifically. And then the asexual spectrum also kind of includes something called demisexuality, where it's like, yeah, this person does have sexual attraction, does experience it, but doesn't experience it until there's a degree of emotional and intellectual intimacy between them and the person. So you're going to see, you're likely to see less one night stands.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting part of neurodivergence is you are more likely to see that. You're also more likely to hear, like as a therapist, more likely to hear about your clients practicing non-monogamy or polyamory. And there's really interesting reasons for that specifically amongst neurodivergent people. Specifically, when you ask like a more neurotypical person, like, what are your experiences of being in a relationship? And it's like, oh, well, this person is, provides for me emotionally, intellectually, sexually, romantically, et cetera, et cetera. And there's this expectation that this one person typically fills this one role, and that relationship is elevated above other relationships in your life. Like this relationship is my priority. My friends and family come next. In neurodivergent experiences, what you'll often find is that there's a lot more fluidity in terms of the expectation for what a romantic or sexual partner will fulfill compared to friendships. So you might find that neurodivergent people rank their friendships or close family relationships as being comparably important to a romantic partner. And that explains some of the polyamory as well, because it's like, well, with this person I connect really romantically, with this person I connect really strongly in terms of sexual dynamics, this person, it's great intellectual and emotional and spiritual connection. And so all of a sudden there's like a destructuring, a de-hierarchization of relationships that lends itself to polyamory, even if, and monogamous people as well may have less of a hierarchy in terms of their relationships. And again, neurotypicals fit in with our society, and hierarchy is an integral component of our society.
Can you expand a little more on the when you were talking about the overlap of like the everything, not everything, but like a lot of things you mentioned that are under like the queer umbrella, and how that has overlap with neurodivergence?
Yeah, there's so much we don't know about it. Partly it, in my mind, queerness is a much more natural state than our society presents it as, right? Like part of neurotypicality, not all of it, you don't have to be straight to be neurotypical, but straight scripts are really expected. And there's a lot more black and white kind of man, woman. This is the man's role, this is the woman's role. And we have all agreed to follow these scripts. Neurodivergent people they can follow the script for a time. Sometimes they can't even always follow the script or learn the script. And also, when you remove that script, you realize that humans are hugely complex and that we're relational beings, and the likelihood that without social constraints that the same percentage of us would identify as straight seems very low to me. So because neurodivergent people are less likely to follow these social scripts, they're also more likely to just be honest about the urges and relational experiences that they have. We don't know all the details in terms of the neural wiring. We don't understand, like there's not a gay gene per se, there's all these factors to it that we don't understand. Yeah. But my idea of it is really when you can't or won't follow scripts, you have a lot more freedom to actually be in touch with this whole range of natural experiences.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really interesting theory or perspective. Yeah, I like the way you put that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really cool. And it does, again, like the more you unravel it, it's like, oh, of course, if you're not confined by these scripts, there is so much more wiggle room to elevate friendships to the most important relationships in your life, to realize that you can introduce romance into platonic relationships, right? You can bring your friends flowers, make them dinner, go on vacations together. You can even build really meaningful lives. And you'll see that more often with neurodivergent people, where they're like, oh no, I choose to live with my best friends. And we're building a life together.
Yeah.
It's a platonic life. But it's as rich, as meaningful, as deep as any romantic or sexual relationship you can imagine. I mean, it's wonderfully nourishing when you think about it. It's like, it's something that I think that other groups of people could really take a page from that book.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say, how much of us like kind of wanted to do that at one time, right? And just like, oops, it's not gonna happen. But yeah, definitely, I agree.
Yeah.
So and since we're on the topic of relationships, right? What are some other I guess like key points you'd want to talk about in regards to relationships? I'm assuming you have more stuff as far as thoughts in regards to like cohabitating and other factors that come up obviously in relationships.
Yeah. We talked last week about how important it is to as you are becoming more comfortable, or like trying to create greater ease in your life as an autistic person, that first of all, unmasking, allowing yourself to not participate in normative social scripts all the time is really important in terms of energy level, in terms of emotional well-being, and then also your environment. Is your environment conducive to your sensory needs, to your emotional needs? And so when you talk about cohabitating when you're neurodivergent, it is so important that you are doing your best to communicate with your partner and to create a shared space where one or both of you, if you're both neurodivergent, or multiple of you if there's a polyamorous relationship, are able to unmask when you're at home. So are you allowed to just be exhausted? Are you allowed to just be hyper-focused on a passion? Or are you allowed, like, welcome to info dump? Will the person just lovingly listen to you even if they aren't interested in the topic? And so unmasking at home is huge, and creating an environment for your neurodivergent partner where they know that it's safe for them not to have to follow these scripts is really, really important. Having a home, like having conversations around, like, where are our lights too bright? Are there sensory experiences that are just really uncomfortable? Is the shower head too strong? And because for a lot of autistic people, like, being in the shower is fine, not being in the shower is fine, but the transition into the shower is distressing and the transition out of the shower is distressing. How do we make these things feel a little bit better? And so that's one crucial part of it, is just making sure that you're having that open conversation about what your needs are. And if you're not sure, trying different things out, like just trying to tune in to, oh, actually, like, I feel better when the kitchen is organized in this way, or what have you. So that's part of it. Another thing about cohabitation with autism is, for a lot of us, even when we really trust someone, totally unmasking is very, very hard. And the need to be in control of our environments can be very, very high. So when possible, having your own space, be it a room, be it a section of a room, somewhere that is just yours, where you can go and control everything and not be concerned about someone else's needs, can be really restorative and really helpful. So you will see that autistic people are more likely to have separate bedrooms than neurotypical people. And in a neurotypical script, oh, trouble in the marriage if you've got separate beds.
Yeah.
Neurodivergent people could mean that they are healthier in the relationship than they've ever been, because they have space to go and just be.
Hmm. Yeah, I was gonna make a joke that you're making me envious now, but I'm kidding. Ugh. All right, so interesting. Okay, gotcha. And then, what other things come up in these type of scenarios where there's maybe cohabitation and, I guess expectations, right? You mentioned there's certain types of expectations in a neurotypical relationship that don't necessarily reflect in the neurodivergent. What other things are there that are kind of contrary that could come up?
Yeah, well, you may experience a whole slew of things that there are things that are super beneficial about
Mhm.
autistic relationships. There are also things that are difficult, just like in any relationship.
Mhm.
Some of the things that can make navigating relationships as an autistic person difficult are parts of those constellation of traits and experiences, such as having difficulty identifying your own emotions as they're happening.
Mhm.
And so when you're talking about like communicating with a partner, um, first of all, if they ask you, how are you feeling right now?
Mhm.
You might not know the answer. And it can be hard to even say that you don't know the answer. Um, Especially because if there's an experience of overwhelm, when someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer, what can happen is you can shut down, you can go nonverbal. And so if your partner doesn't understand that when you're overstimulated, you go nonverbal, or maybe you have a meltdown, which just means like you kind of lose control of your body, you go into a fight response,
Mhm.
or a flight response, where all of a sudden you don't even have control over it, but you're slamming your fists on the table,
Mhm.
or you're wailing, or you're running to the other room.
Yeah.
um,
Sorry. Can I ask about that more? As far as does that look different when it's because when you think about people having that response, it's kind of it could be seen as like a meltdown for somebody who maybe has just like low distress tolerance, right? When whatever form that came in, whether it was like complex trauma and just an overstimulated nervous system, but does it look different with neurodivergence?
I mean, in some ways, yes. In other ways, like, I mean, conceptualizing it as low distress tolerance is is fine, but low according to whom?
Yeah,
Um, and the answer would probably be low according to neurotypical.
that's a good point. Yeah, because it's kind of stimuli is different, right? Like it could be brighter lights and sounds that are typically not super distressing.
Right, right. And but for this person, so if you were, instead of looking at the trigger of what leads to a meltdown,
Mhm.
just like how we don't define trauma by the event, we
Mhm.
define trauma by the person's response.
Yeah, how it's played out for you, right?
Yeah. Um, Same thing it can be true of looking at autistic meltdowns.
Mhm.
So we don't need to look at the trigger and judge or evaluate if the trigger is legitimate. What we need to do is we need to remember that the emotional intensity, if a neurotypical person was experiencing that degree of emotional intensity,
Mhm.
they also would be dysregulated,
Yeah,
but they are not experiencing that from the same triggers.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's just or with given the stimuli we're talking about with neurodivergence, maybe kind of already again stuff that typically we wouldn't necessarily be as what word am I looking for? Be as I guess I'll just use the word triggered by that. Those are things to take into consideration. And over here on this side, right, the neurodivergent side, it's already compounding. It's already piling from these stimuli that we're maybe not as aware of.
Exactly. Well, and you if we remember that not fitting into society and being told that we're wrong for the ways that we move through the world, which is a very typical neurodivergent experience, that in and of itself is trauma. And it ends up being this complex trauma where it's not necessarily big things, but it's a lot of having to abandon yourself in order to be accepted by others. And over time, that really wears on the nervous system. We also have environments that are super, like, you go to the grocery store, the lights are bright, they're playing bad music, you know. I mean, like, you know, so all of our environments are built for neurotypical expectations. And so if you keep in mind that so many neurodivergent people have experienced complex trauma for their whole lives, and that accumulates. And so when you're looking at what's going to set someone off, it's like, not only are they already either hypersensitive or hyposensitive to things, but also they've been chronically, in terms of their nervous system, chronically tired.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. All right. And just kind of to, I guess, put the finishing points, right, on the just, relationships and whatnot. Did you want to say any last things about relationships and kind of how to, I guess, break from scripts?
Yeah, I mean, be as honest with yourself and your partner as you can, and be patient with yourself. Like, not being able to identify your emotions when you're in conflict with someone you love is so painful, right? And it feels quite threatening. And neurodivergent people may experience heightened rejection sensitivity because they've had to self-abandon and or have been abandoned by society in so many ways. The sensitivity to rejection is heightened. And so what may feel like a small request from one person, hey, could you do the dishes? Could feel like, oh my God, I'm failing my partner. So just having this awareness that, like, this constellation of traits does mean that you deserve to be communicating as openly as you can. Realizing that it is okay that if you aren't always able to communicate or identify your needs, but having a partner who provides the degree of safety and space for you to process, to try and figure these things out, to adjust your environments, that makes such a difference. Safety in relationships is so huge for everyone, but especially for people who are already breaking away from the script. Now we don't have a script.
Yeah.
Now we're having to create it for ourselves, and compound it, and with the potential for compounding shame because we are different, we're misfits, we're wrong in our society. And so finding a partner who knows that you're not wrong for being as you are is going to be really, really important. And letting people see you, risking the discomfort of potentially being rejected so that you can actually be accepted, is so huge. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of other things I could come up with in terms of, like, how do the relationships look different, but I think those are really some of the key takeaways that I would want people to think about is let yourself be at home.
Yeah, that's great, actually. And on that note, right, I just wanted to ask you one more thing about it, kind of going full circle in talking about, in order for that, right, to happen, then for that to occur, there would need to be that bit of, like, self-awareness in a way of knowing, like, I have this is my, like, diagnosis, right? And so on that note, right, as far as coming into a relationship with that awareness, how often would you say you see or hear about people going in all the way into adulthood without knowing or without having that formal diagnosis, and just kind of how do you say, powering through those years and formative years in society, managing these symptoms? Like, how often does that happen where they find out way later?
It's tremendously common.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, people will know from a young age that they don't fit in.
Yeah. Okay.
So that part of it, maybe there's been a sense of, even if it wasn't fully articulated in your mind, but it's a felt experience that that as social beings, we just know when we're not a part of our group, you know.
Yeah.
It's a survival threat. And so our nervous systems register it as such, even if we haven't had it named quite so plainly. And then, yeah, later in adulthood, a lot of times autism is identified either because of ongoing relational issues, right? Why can my partner and I just not understand each other? Why is my partner so mad at me? I just said what was true. You know, these relational distress can lead to it. And then also burnout. Autistic burnout can lead to it. So many years of masking, you just end up losing steam, maybe like needing to take time off work or losing a job. You know, people saying, hey, like, you gotta go, man, you gotta be moving. And you're like, I am in a freeze state. I am stuck. I am shut down. I am exhausted. That can often lead to diagnoses as well. And, you know, it's interesting because when you do start becoming aware of it, it can feel like hard to know where to start, or like, how do I actually work with this? And I mean, therapy is a great resource for starting to parse some of those things out. But even now, after, you know, a few years of having a diagnosis and years of therapy where I tried to like not people please so much and where I was trying to unmask more, I still in my day-to-day life realize ways that I'm either masking or accommodating other people, or not even aware of needs that I've had until something kind of accidentally switches how I'm interacting with the world. I used to sit in uncomfortable chairs and I would like accommodate how the chair was positioned. And then one day it finally clicked that I could actually move the chair. I could actually grab a pillow, but I didn't even realize that I was deprived of comfort, or that I was uncomfortable chronically, until I started doing the work and then tuning in to, oh, wait, I might have resources available to make this feel better. And for those people who feel like, I just don't even know where to start, I don't know how to name what I need, I don't know what I'm feeling when I'm feeling it, one thing I would say is autistic people often have great pattern recognition and actually have great problem solving skills. And so I would encourage people to trust their ability to see patterns, trust their ability that when something feels good or right, that is something that you can believe and you can apply to other areas of your life. Just slowly building on what you're learning as you're learning it, observing the patterns, and then if the patterns aren't working for you, seeing where the wiggle room is to shift it. To create new patterns.
And if you don't mind me asking, right, you were late diagnosed, right, and later in life, adulthood?
Yeah, like 38. I'm 39 now.
Wow. Okay. So how did you finally, how did you finally like come to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I had friends who were kind of pointing it out. I had noticed for, years before that the people that I liked the best were often people who had diagnoses, but I just thought, oh, well, they're just interesting people. I didn't identify as, oh, actually, neurodivergent people often experience greater relational ease with other people who are neurodivergent. Which is very much the case. And so, yeah, partly it was external. My friends pointing out, hey, you might be autistic. And then I found a lot of relief. Initially, I had a I had I think kind of a demand avoidance response. Demand avoidance is another autistic trait where if someone tells you you should do something or you are something, your first response is absolutely not. And the more compassionate language for it is a persistent drive for autonomy. And so, yeah, so I initially had a very strong averse reaction where I was like, nope, that's not me. How dare you? Don't tell me who I am. And then as I started observing my behaviors and I started reading more about autism, like I would read about autistic traits and I would realize like, oh, these people I really like and respect are talking about these things that I share in common with them. And they're actually really wonderful things. Like earlier in the episode, we were talking about how much neurotypical people could learn from the quality of connection that can come from being neurodivergent. Neurodivergents they don't have a monopoly on these things. They're just not honoring the script. And I think at the end of the day, when I realized that not honoring the script wasn't a personal failing, and that it was actually something that in many ways I wore with pride when I talked about my values and things like that, that's when I started being like, hey, this sounds pretty cool. I want to know more about myself, and this is true to me.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and I think that's an important point too, in that, everything we're talking about today is only possible when, if we do have this awareness, right? And then that gives us the approach we need to do these things, all these things we talked about today. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you for that. Any last things for today? You want to plug anything? You want Psychology Today, Molly Barrett? Anything else?
Yeah, on Psychology Today, I am Molly Barrett. But in terms of like last plugs or things like that, I'm trying to think if there's like one kind of thing that I'd like to leave this on.
I got one.
Yeah.
For you. Krishnamurti, right?
Yes. That is a great call out. So there is a Krishnamurti quote. It's actually misquoted a lot of the time. The misquote is, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society," which is a great misquote. And it really does sum up.
Yeah, it ended up on Facebook over a picture of JFK or something.
No doubt. But if it's okay, I would love to read the full quote.
Absolutely. Feel free. Yes.
All right. So Krishnamurti said, "Has not society itself helped to make the individual unhealthy? Of course, the unhealthy must be made healthy. That goes without saying. But why should the individual adjust himself to an unhealthy society? If he is healthy, he will not be a part of it. Without first questioning the health of society, what is the good of helping misfits to conform to it?" So with that, I would say keep being misfits.
Thank you so much, Molly. Appreciate it.
Aaron, thank you. I love this. I'll come back anytime.
All right. Part 3 coming up. Take care, Molly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll meet next time.
All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.